that like a self-portrait, like the pickup artist in some respect?
I think so. The more I think about that, that's a good point, especially after watching the documentary of The Outsider.
Right.
It's definitely about him. Yeah. There's no doubt about that.
Two girls and a guy. He really brought Robert Downey Jr. back. They had some very fruitful collaborations together. When Will I Be Loved? And then this film, Tyson, of course, is... I was about to say Knockout, and that's cheesy, but it really, I don't mean to be corny about it. It really is. So all three of us, you and I, Jerry, and then Aaron joined in, and we each had some questions lined up for him, and so we put him in front of the Movie Geek firing squad, and a great conversation ensued. So here you go. Here is James Toback. Enjoy it.
Mr. Toback, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I'll ask this. I'll start off. You were an asthmatic kid, and I was wondering what drew you to sports, being asthmatic as a youngster.
I played tennis, and I was playing tennis at the same time as I was getting asthmatic attacks living in Florida in the winters and in Long Island in the summers. And I think it was one of the ways of compensating, trying to get some semblance of athleticism and physicality into my life. And I was a kind of naturally gifted tennis player, so I persevered, even though the truth is that I was always kind of fighting against it. That's why I was startled to hear from Mike in the movie, because I hadn't known it, even though I'd known him for 24 years, that he had these breathing problems when he was a kid.
Right.
One doesn't usually think of him as physically limited or fragile.
Mm-hmm. And when you were in the midst of the documentary process of this film, when did it occur to you that Mike Tyson fell in line with the protagonist of your other films?
Well, it actually occurred to me when I met him when he was 19.
Okay.
And I thought, this guy has so much, despite ostensible dissimilarities, he has so much that is connected to the characters I'm writing and the way I'm writing them that I could easily use him in a film. And it didn't seem like a practical thing at the moment because he was just about to become heavyweight champion, but it actually did occur to me that down the road that'd be a real possibility.
Mm-hmm. And, I remember an interview you once did with Elvis Mitchell, and you made mention of your lead characters not having much time left after the movie was over. And
not doing what?
Not having much time. Once the movie was over, they would probably be gone in a few days or a few weeks or so forth.
Right.
And I'm curious, in regards to Tyson, is Mike surprised that he's past the age of 40, and are you surprised?
Well, he says in the movie, can't believe you reached 40.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's probably ongoingly surprised with each new year.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly didn't, when I first got to know him, didn't expect him to live a long life, long being defined in his terms, not in conventional ones. And I've actually reached the age myself of 64, which is utterly insane, given that when I was 22, 23, I was promising everybody I was going to be dead at 26. And actually, when I hit my 27th birthday, was almost embarrassed because I thought, how do I explain this to everybody that I've been telling I was going to be dead at 26? Now that I'm old enough to be my own grandfather at 26, there's something almost comical about it.
Right. Well, would you say that, I would think that starting with two girls and a guy, that your protagonist kind of started to reflect this kind of cautious optimism of possibly living longer than they might have expected.
That was the only movie which I have to say I felt almost guilty about ending with what I secretly considered to be artificially constructed hopefulness. In fact, when I look at my back on my movies, that's the one that strikes me as having an egregious false note at the ending, because it really does imply that they're going to have a kind of cheerful future. And even though I'm always optimistic on some fundamental level, I secretly believe that's wishful thinking, and that, as what George Cukor used to call, a bad end is always around the corner. In fact, that was whenever anybody would come up with a conversation, somehow Cukor would end up saying he's going to come to a bad end, or he came to a bad end. And I finally said to him one day, why not just assume that everyone is going to come to a bad end, and then you don't have to bother saying it.
Well, at the end of the movie, Tyson, you dedicate it to your mother, and you've written probably some of the most independent-minded women in the movie. Is there a connection between the impact of your mother and the way you write women roles?
If there is, and I'm sure there is, it probably, despite 3 years of psychoanalysis, eludes me, at least consciously. But I do clearly, I feel that she, was the seminal influence in my life in every way, and that everything that has happened in my life in some way revolves around the relationship that I had with her. And I look at her absence, as that quote implies, as a kind of ongoing, haunting reality. Mm-hmm. I think that the need to feel her presence is sort of it's just always there with me. I kind of what's the right way to put it? I look at everything else as a sort of unreal approximation of that relationship. And in fact, one of the things that I think has been at work since she died is that my own mortality, which, as I say, has always been an ongoing, has had an ongoing imminence in my mind, however long that's been. I feel that that it's 10 times truer, mm-hmm. and the absurdity of being alive is an ongoing conscious awareness, which I only eliminate to a degree when I'm making a movie, because right. I'm thinking, well, this is a specific task at hand, and I regard it as a sort of mission. So, I can actually say, well, why don't I suspend my sense of imminent mortality, even though I have not all that much control over it, for a while until this next movie is over. And then, of course, I always hope there'll be another movie which comes to replace it in my mind, and that movie will suffice to justify continued existence.
Right. And to kind of sort of continuing that vein of the strong woman possibility, I got to ask, I'll ask my last question that, because I became obsessed when I heard about this biopic you've always wanted to do, and I was kind of wondering, is there any status on your Victoria Woodhull?
Well, the status is that I definitely want to do it, and the question is, who's going to finance it? I mean, the word is that it's going to be ongoingly difficult, and certainly that's been the case over the years. I think I'm going to have to get lucky. If it gets financed, which I hope it will, it'll almost be a fluke, because that is so out of step with what's being done without a real struggle. And that was true even before this economic reality came about, but certainly is truer now, and I think that the chances of its improving are slender, simply because it validates the view that movie executives have anyway, which is that it's safest to make movies for 12-year-old boys, and anything else is risky. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to hang in. I'm actually actively trying to find a way of doing it right now. I don't know in a second, but certainly over the next couple of months.
Mm. Mr. Toback, this is Jamie. I just have I just have a couple of questions for you, and then I'll hand it over to Jerry for a couple more, and we'll let you off the hook. One of the things that I find so fascinating and endearing about you, and I guess it speaks to why you are a filmmaker, is how upfront and open you are about your demons and your ailments and so forth. And in drawing parallels between yourself and Tyson, I can see where Tyson would channel all that energy in the ring. And I'm wondering, is that this is? And you talked about this earlier. If you could expand upon it a little bit, is filmmaking that for you?
It's definitely a way of obviously not forgetting, but it's a way of sublimating the obsession with mortality, or of putting it on hold for a moment. And it's not a conscious act, but it definitely is. Anything that is absorbing, by definition, is taking hold of the mind for the moment, and that's about the only thing that succeeds that way with me.
And you mentioned psychoanalysis earlier, and there's a kind of famous quote from David Lynch on this subject, where he went to a shrink and he asked the shrink, "Will this affect my creativity?" And the shrink said, "Yes, it very well could." And so then he walked out because he didn't want to have any part of it. Is that a fear of yours that somehow that could have an effect?
I think that when I was in it, I was so resistant to its working on the level that the analyst wanted it to work on, that it never occurred to me that it would actually be a problem in that regard. That is to say, I didn't look at it as therapeutic or as geared to changing my life, which of course is what he did, and in changing my behavior. I looked at it as a way of getting to know myself better and finding things out that fascinated me about myself.
Yeah.
And of course, we had an ongoing problem as a result. There was a clash of wills consistently over that difference of opinion and goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let me turn you over to Jerry, and he'll come up with a couple of quick questions for you, and then we'll let you go.
Yeah.
Jerry, you're on.
Okay, great. Mr. Toback, it is a great honor to be with you today. I just got back from a screening of Tyson, and I will let you know it was packed, and the reaction was very favorable. I have to ask you, though. That while watching the film, I couldn't get it out of my mind of some of your other protagonists in your films and how much Tyson has in common with them, especially in Harvey Keitel and The Fingers and James Caan and The Gambler. And it's like Tyson never existed. You would have had to invent him. Do you agree with that?
Quite possibly. He seems to be the sort of culmination of and fruition of a number of characters that I've written about over the years, and he certainly feels, in a way, almost to be a fictional creation, as indeed I many times think I am a fictional creation of myself, or that I'm this ongoing, day-by-day created character who has an actual physical reality, but who seems to exist in some way outside the realm of reality. And it's as if I'm saying on some level, now what do I do with this person today? And I'm sort of complicit in his ongoing formation of identity, but there's somehow an unreality to it all, as there is to existence. I mean, if you think about how crazy it is that we're on this planet, and you look in particular at the Hubble telescope's discoveries, which, by the way, they're fixing the Hubble again to try to give it one last run now, and I have to say I hope they succeed, because a great deal of my awareness of not just what's out there, but what our relationship to what's out there is, comes from the Hubble.
Oh, I agree with you 100% with that. I agree 100%. That's fascinating stuff. Now, going back to Tyson, though, I am curious. Why didn't you present like any opposing sides, or did you think that Mike Tyson alone was more than enough? His viewpoint was more than enough for the film.
Yeah, it just struck me as superfluous.
Okay.
I mean, the idea that I would have a bunch of, well, I don't mean to be too offensive, but secondhand and ultimately lame opinions articulated just didn't interest me. I mean, to have Mike Tyson is one of the most fascinating talkers I've ever known in my life.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
And to take what I'm getting from him and, squeeze it down so I can fit in the sort of secondhand gossip of others,
right,
would have seemed to me a catastrophic waste of movie time.
And he kind of does that in a way too at various points. I feel he's sometimes. I mean, in the film, he comes across as his own worst enemy. So I think
he's certainly a very highly self-analytical and self-reflective guy. So you're constantly getting a sort of multifaceted view of him from him.
That's true, and I think that's the thing I want to bring up, because he is a very complex character, and I think your documentary is the first to really bring about this like multi-dimensional portrait of him, whereas everything before this has really sadly been a caricature.
Yes, that's definitely true.
I wanted to actually touch on the movie Fingers, and what was your reaction? And were you approached about the remake, the French remake, the Beat That My Heart Skipped?
I was approached, and I it was more a formality about how to get rights, and then I had one meeting with, Jacques Audiard, the director.
Right.
And, I think he was just interested. He's a very kind of sly guy.
Right.
I think he was interested in getting my take and seeing how it fit into his notion and seeing if there was anything I might say that would add to what he was planning. And I felt that he did a very interesting film. It was extremely well written.
Mm-hmm.
I also felt well directed as well.
Right.
I also felt that it was, to be blunt about it, the ending was quite disappointing because
was it too upbeat?
Yeah, because it beat that my heart skipped. I mean,
yeah.
The truth is that the movie has to end on a dark note. There is no way to do it honestly any other way. And of course, he gets away free at the end. And I also, just on a rational level, don't believe that Russian gangster whom he beat would have allowed him to get away with that beating if he was allowed to survive, which he was. And I also didn't believe that he would hold a pistol to his face and start crying instead of killing him.
Right.
It's one extreme to the other.
Right.
But I mean, I actually thought it was quite a good film, except for that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I have one last question, and it's I just was curious how your Harvard education, your Ivy League days, have informed your filmmaking. And by that I mean also want to go one step further and say, what's a nice boy like you doing, fascinated by the underbelly of life?
Well, I don't know. I always have been.
Okay, that makes two of us. Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah. It goes back so far, and it's so deep rooted that it's hard to remember a time when it wasn't. It isn't like a conversion took place.
You were always fascinated by like this life that maybe that when you're growing up you read about and saw in films. Is it something like that? I mean, it was more immediate than that.
Okay. I grew up. I had in Atlantic Beach, which is where Long Island, where you had a country house.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of Jewish and Italian gangsters, and their kids, and I was quite friendly with many of them, and actually mixed in that world. So it had an immediate appeal to me. It wasn't just from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
I guess let's start with your consciousness of Mr. Kubrick and where did that begin for you?
That's one of those things like any. My God, you almost say an artist. What was the first Picasso or Watteau or it's hard to pin down. Sometimes movies seem like it's a little easier. Someone brought you to it, or I can more closely identify, my first experience with Gone with the Wind because I remember going to it with my mother and that sort of thing. But Barry Lyndon, I can remember going to as well. But I certainly knew about Kubrick before then. And so the earliest association, I'm not sure. I just became aware of the movies and wanting to see what the next picture that this person was going to do. I can remember that getting into Clockwork Orange was a impossibility when I was young, that sort of thing. So it became he made it much easier with Barry Lyndon. That seemed like a more acceptable kind of movie. My mother thought there's a costume drama and that should be all right. Little did she know how long it was, or but what it would be about. But she, that always seems more acceptable to people than the landscape of Clockwork Orange. Seems just repellent and frightening to a lot of people.
So what were your first kind of vivid memories of the film? What captured you right away about it?
Well, I think that's a picture that perhaps more than there are certainly images from it that are. I think the way it unfolds, I appreciate it as a writer. Coming from an interesting source, and even the first few scenes open in these kind of reverse slow zooms, that kind of begin like chapters and give you a kind of sense of the literary. And I appreciated that. And the narrator, Michael Horton, had a kind of wonderful, dry sense of humor about things. It wasn't like Tom Jones, but it was, it just felt right. And it put things into a kind of perspective. And the tableaus were so beautiful. I mean, obviously, Kubrick's hand, no doubt, is on every frame of it. But the cinematography, the art direction, Ken Adam and John Alcott, did such stellar work in it, and great people. I mean, there's some wonderful character actors in there in relatively small parts. Mm-hmm. Leonard Rossiter, I think, is fantastic in the movie. Hardy Kruger, I like very much. Patrick McGee is somebody I've always had an affinity for. Murray Melvin, I think is that his name? Plays
yes.
Reverend Runt. Love him. Just such an amazing face, I think that a lot of those very vivid people who pop up throughout, but really fine work from Ryan O'Neal. I think a really, really strong performance, and so I think Kubrick always was great about collecting. Maybe that's a perfect word for him. Collecting really interesting people to go along for these long rides. I mean, there was something like 300 shooting days on that movie. But rather than moments of like, well, it's the apes smashing the bones, or this, a moment from Full Metal Jacket or The Shining, it's Jack Nicholson's face in the door. Yeah, I don't know that there's an image, from it in the same way for me, but it's these beautiful, almost like paintings, almost, these gorgeous tableaus, and the period feels so alive and so vivid. That it's one of those movies that helps me escape into a place and really spend a few hours just away from my own world. I can completely immerse in a picture like that. It's one of those pictures that the kind of movie that people, when they say you must see it on the screen, they're talking about a movie like this.
Right.
I know that it's played like this Cinerama Dome, and that's where you want to see it. A place like that. This is the kind of movie that should be in 3D or IMAX, when I heard, The Great Gatsby is going to be made in 3D, I kind of initially went, oh, what? But then thinking, maybe so. Maybe Lerman knows what he's talking about. Those are the kind of movies that I want to see up on the big screen. So it was certainly that. It was a movie as far as I was concerned, but felt smart, and at that age I felt like, gosh, I don't know everything, but I'm not going to let on. I'm not going to let people know I don't know what they're talking about. And so it was something that you could go back to time and again, and the smarter I got as a person, the more I was able to enjoy the picture. But,
I feel the same way, because especially with Kubrick films, watching them now as opposed to maybe when I first saw them 20 years ago, they're different experiences for me. I mean, they're much richer. They're deeper in meaning for me.
Yeah. And I think they work on various levels. I mean, there's rarely been a more visceral filmmaker as well. I mean, who could, make a compelling image. And so I think a lot of his pictures work on just that level, but they also keep revealing themselves each time you sit down and really engage with them. And I appreciate that, and that's right down to the last picture, I think. I think there's so much there to really enjoy and then make a connection with as well. But Barry Lyndon was just the period. I found it a movie that played to so many of the things that I appreciated that I was drawn to it and would go back to it time and again.
In terms of his, well, first of all, let's talk about his scripting, his writing, because he's known primarily, obviously, as a visual director. I mean, those are the memories of Kubrick that kind of burn themselves in your brain. But most of his films he adapted from novels, and Barry Lyndon, to his own admission, he didn't think had any kind of literary value. He wanted it to be mostly a visual experience. Where do you see Kubrick falling in terms of the writing in his films, including Barry Lyndon?
Well, I mean, I think that's I only wish that I could, think that there wasn't that kind of value, and I wish I could write things of such little value. I think it's pretty spectacular that the both aspects that he's able to control so completely. So to me, I would imagine that no matter what he says about it, that he loved that part of the process because there's such control. There's no wind, there's no sun dropping, there's no producer, there's none of the things when you're writing. The world really is yours. You are such a creator, such a god on paper. You can write down 2 moons and really easily and just mean it. And then the poor production designer's like, what do you mean 2 moons? And the visual effects people are scratching their heads thinking, how are we going to make this work? And the producer thinks, how are we going to pay for that? So that all those compromises that come with the making of a picture, but the realization of it, but the moment of sitting there and controlling, what I'm going to take from that novel and what I'm going to add to this and which characters I'm going to amalgamate, all within his control. And I can only imagine a seeming perfectionist like himself really actually did enjoy that part of the process. And I think his scripts were rather well crafted, across the board. He worked with other people along the way, but he, I think I can't imagine that he wasn't very much in control throughout. And I really admire the results. Taking a novel from that period, to go back and look at those novels, look at a Vanity Fair or Tom Jones or a book like this, really dense and flowery, not even poetic, but just flowery language, and to cut such a clear narrative over such a long film, I thought he handled it extremely well. So I'm not that he doth protest too much. I just think that maybe he really looks forward to the visual aspects. I know he was very exacting in the costumes and everything being what it was, but I think that his work, no matter how he felt about it, was awfully good in terms of writing.
Well, and thematically too. Kubrick's films are filled with so many unique ideas, and ideas that kind of obsessed him, that he returned to time and time again. He loved to explore as do you, I would imagine, through your work, kind of the darker side of human nature. And also there's something running through Barry Lyndon, in a lot of his films, this sort of inevitability, that his fate it's destined. It's predestined for him almost. Do you see that?
I think there is that. Certainly there's he makes his hand by gambling, and fate plays a certain part, but there is this kind of wheel of fortune. There's a kind of, in some of his best work, there's certainly, and maybe that's in some of the best work in the world. There's this case as well, but certainly you see it in the hands of someone like him. You start to find themes, and there is that journey. There's the same kind of journey that Alex takes in Clockwork Orange, you see, happen throughout the story of Barry Lyndon, and you see in even the journey that the character that Tom Cruise plays in Eyes Wide Shut. And certainly there's journeys into darkness and sometimes out the other side and sometimes not for a lot of characters in pictures that Kubrick directed. But I think certainly he didn't shy away from both sides of humanity, and I think he was amazed and amused by human beings and human nature. I never found him. Maybe it's because people have accused me of the same, of being cynical, but I don't think of him in those terms. But I think he was very realistic about the capacity that we have for both good and bad, and was fascinated by it. But also, bad is just interesting to portray. It's like the villain often gets all the good lines, and so to create those characters, to imbue them with the word and image that he was so capable of doing. It's I imagine there was great pleasure in the kind of anthropological study that he did of people, but again through the lens of entertainment. He wasn't a documentarian. For someone who started out shooting people on the streets, even you look at his photographs. When he worked for, I don't know, what was it, Look magazine or something like that. He had a poetic eye. He had an eye that caught sometimes very unreal and singular moments. He was not just a man on the street kind of person.
I'm glad that you mentioned. I'm so sorry. I'm glad that you mentioned that you don't find him cynical, because I think what people a lot of times miss about Kubrick's films is the compassion, and I think they miss it because it's not as easy as sentimentality, which Kubrick certainly never was. But I do feel compassion in a lot of these films. I mean, do you get that sense from any of Kubrick's work?
Oh, sure. I absolutely do. I think that he. I think he, maybe that's a godlike position as well. But I didn't feel him judging people. I felt him, watching. If anything, he could be a little distanced, and sometimes that just made for a great image, But I think that he, I think Barry Lyndon's a perfect example of that. I don't think he looks at Barry, even at a moment where Barry's like beating his son, or, at his highest point, the opening of, he probably couldn't be more full of himself than after the intermission. I think it opens on them in a carriage ride, and he's smoking a pipe and looks quite pleased with himself. I think that he doesn't look at that person with disdain so much as a sense of, again, amusement isn't right. Bemusement isn't right either. It really is a kind of not quite scientific detachment, but I think a kind of godlike sense of, I have put these things into play and in order, and this is the, I'd like to see what happens here, and Barry Lyndon plays out as it was meant to play out, and he is left to the fate that he both deserves and brought upon himself, and sometimes events are greater than the man, and I think it ends with such a passage that kind of exemplifies that, of that, good or bad, rich or poor, where they're all equal now, that we're just people. I mean, he could have done or said or written anything for the end of that picture, but I think that that really did say this is just one glimpse of one person in a huge world that and he was no better or worse than so many others. I don't think that's a person who looks and says I hate people and I hate this guy in particular. He knows how easy it is to slip and to fall and to to scale great heights and to plummet into vast depths. So I never saw him as somebody who felt cynical about things.
Yeah, and there's also something about, I mean, he worked in he was a genre filmmaker. He took an established genre, and he made it uniquely his own. He kind of reinvented it in his own voice. How do you see the way he did that with the costume drama in particular?
Well, I think you said it, better than I'm going to, or I'm going to steal it and pretend that it was mine. That he really took the genre. You're very right. I mean, he worked in so many different genres that he really was able to make them kind of uniquely his own. Embrace it, all the things, all the stuff that we're used to from those genres, and then really kind of turn them on their ear and give us a different take on it, give it certainly his own take on it. And I think he did that very successfully in Barry Lyndon. He managed to take something that I had seen a number of times and done well and poorly, and make it as, he always seemed to set the bar wherever he went so high that if I'm going to make a costume drama, I will make, the most costume-filled, most, it'll have the most original clothing from the period, and, I'll do everything as well and better than I've seen it before. I think that he did that time and again. He would, he was a person who would kind of reinvent the bar rather than just set it high. I think that he certainly did that same thing there. It's I kind of revere what he was able to do, and take the time, and was given this time and space also to do it. To think the idea of getting hundreds of shooting days today, you could give 300 shooting days to one person, and they would never come up with Barry Lyndon. It's not. Right. I don't believe in that. If I leave some train dates in a room long enough, they'll come up with Hamlet. It's always sounded great that in a classroom, and then I thought, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
I think they're going to waste a lot of paper. Is what they're going to do. But they're cute as anything, and it'll be great to watch them try. But I don't think they're probably going to come up with Hamlet. And I don't think that somebody else with 300 shooting days would come up with Barry Lyndon. He was a singular talent. There's no question about it. And I think that one of the great sadnesses, as much as I like the picture, I would have loved to see what he'd done with the Western. I would have loved to have seen him do One-Eyed Jacks. And I actually think Marlon Brando did a really fine job with it. I actually like that picture quite a bit. But I wonder what he might have done.
That's one of the great what ifs, and so is Napoleon. Napoleon is a great what if.
At least with Napoleon, I get a taste of this.
With Barry Lyndon,
I get a taste with Barry Lyndon in some way, or I watch The Duelists and I go, well, there's a taste of what that might have been. And now I know Taschen has put out so many materials for Napoleon. We can get even more than a taste of it. But the Western is so singular. It would have been interesting to see what he might have done with that. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead. That's all.
One of the greatest things I've ever read from Kubrick is a memo that was released where he was kind of pitching the idea of Napoleon, I think, to Warner Brothers. And he said, I can't reveal too many details, except that I fully expect it to be the greatest movie ever made. And you knew that Kubrick meant it. Yeah. In terms of theme, one more question about theme. He had just come off of Clockwork Orange. Barry Lyndon stylistically is very, very different. But there is a thread of emotional violence in the film. And it reminds me of Scorsese's Age of Innocence in a way, and how he dealt with the costume drama. And I'm sure that he was influenced by Lyndon. That's one of his favorite films. Yeah. Do you see that in Barry Lyndon as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for every battle, and I think it's that the austerity of it, the sort of the duel, the marching into battle, the kind of madness with which they used to, not that hiding in the trees and shooting at each other's any more civilized, but there was something about, sending a row of men, to their death that way, that seemed so chivalrous and so gentlemanly, and yet so kind of barbaric in its own way. But the kind of the way, just the way that he shot the bare knuckle fist fight, in the military scenes, the beating that he gives Lord Bullingdon, but the psychological warfare that these people waged on each other. He handles that so well. He creates a sense of menace, and I'm sure that I would imagine, if I read enough, that Pinter would have been an admirer of Kubrick. Created that same kind of air of that sense that something bad was going to happen. He never knew when it was going to, kind of break out of the boundaries of civility and become something more. I think that creates that unease that he could create, so well, from Paths of Glory to The Killing to, he always had he really created quite a gallery of rogues, of men who, were faced and, able to also deal out so many different kinds of pain and anguish and cruelty. He really, again, I felt, understood the capacity that we have for treating others poorly, and then could also could see the great, or at least moments of beauty. I mean, when you see the look on the face of those soldiers listening to that girl sing at the end of Paths of Glory, beautiful. I mean, some of those shots look like they're straight out of Jean Gabin, Grand Illusion, some French film from the period, or just after the war, certainly before the Second World War. It's just, there's a guy who really understood both sides of humanity. I think, definitely.
I think so too. Yeah. He's been dead since '99, and it's so sad that we don't have any more Kubrick films. But these, we can always go back to and reevaluate and reassess. But how would you define what we're missing in today's film without Kubrick?
Oh, I think there are less and less, people like him. I mean, if you talk about auteurs and people that you wait for that next picture, no matter how long it was, they tended to get longer and longer between each picture in the last, however many years of his life, from say like Spartacus, really, where he started to make these films that were a bit more, his own picture rather than working for somebody else. Starting with sort of, Lolita or Strangelove. And there was more and more time that space between them, but I think that we waited kind of anxiously for that to happen. And in the way it was like, oh my God, here comes another Terrence Malick film. You know what I mean? That I think that there was that event that came with it. The sort of what you can remember from going to the movies in the best sense of going, and the waterfall curtain and the lights going down, and there was such a pleasure to that general aspect of going to the movies, and when it was someone that you had waited for, their next picture. I think there are fewer directors like that you think there's a chance that this will be, to say life-changing is saying a lot, but it may change the face of movies in this way, or the way I look at them in another way. That he was someone who seemed to have the ability to make us believe in movies in that way, that they had properties beyond simply pictures rushing past our face fast enough for us to believe that they were real, that he really did bring a certain kind of life to them, and beyond that, a certain kind of hope that, this was going to be another one of those, not like this was going to be the one, like he almost made it. This was going to be another one of those pictures that we went, wow, he's done something that, few others have done before. So I think, he certainly, and now, as you say, he's been dead a little while. He's stood the test of time of, I don't go back and go, oh, well, now that I look at it, you look at those things every day and you go, no, God damn, it still looks good today. It's still pretty amazing. So I think that is simply going to be the case, that he was a really, in simplest terms, he was a game changer in terms of somebody who could really go beyond what film generally is seen as an entertainment or a diversion, and create the kind of art that comes from the best films.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I miss him, but I constantly review his movies. I mean, they're just delectable to me. And let me tell you that I'm so honored that you took time out to be a part of this series, and I want to tell you that I cherish your movies. And I would so love to welcome you back to talk about your own work sometime in the future.
One of these days, yeah. One of these days when I do a movie as good as one of his, then we'll sit and talk for a long time. that would be nice.
I think you're terrific, and I appreciate it again. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Take care.
In the field of photography and feature filmmaking, our next guest tonight is nothing short of legendary. Before making his mark in films in the early 70s, Jerry Schatzberg had already crafted a career as one of our top professional photographers, having captured a series of intimate and revealing portraits that were featured by the likes of Vogue, Esquire, McCall's, and Life magazines. Perhaps his most iconic images are those featuring a young Bob Dylan, particularly a candid image that went on to grace the cover of Dylan's classic album, Blonde on Blonde. He used his extensive experience in photography to inform his first feature film in 1970, Puzzle of a Downfall Child, starring Faye Dunaway. In 1971's The Panic in Eagle Park, which has just been made available on DVD, Mr. Schatzberg directed Al Pacino in his first starring role as one half of a young couple trying to survive in the throes of heroin addiction. The film went on to receive a Golden Palm nomination at the Cannes Film Festival, an award that he would win for his next Pacino collaboration, Scarecrow, in 1973, co-starring Gene Hackman. Over the years, he's gone on to direct unforgettable classics like Honeysuckle Rose, Misunderstood, Reunion, and Street Smart. In film after film, his artistic vision has been distinguished by an unflinching eye, a compassionate heart, and an endless pursuit of truth. Welcome to the show, a truly exceptional artist, Mr. Jerry Schatzberg. Mr. Schatzberg, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hey, that's quite an introduction. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being with us. It's really an honor for me to be able to speak with you.
Well, it's a pleasure for me, and as you know, it's a pleasure for me to talk about Al, too, so there's no problem at all. I was thinking while you were talking about all those people that I photographed, I realized that I had photographed Al only once, and that was one Polaroid in all that time, because I was never of the mind to really photograph the actors I worked with, because I had something else to do, and I was too, concerned with that. But It's funny to hear about all those other photographs and then realize I only photographed Al once.
Yeah. When were you first made aware of Pacino? Did he audition for you for Panic, or?
No, I had seen him several years before that on stage in Indian Wants the Bronx, and I thought he was just unbelievable. I mean, it was so powerful, and it moved me so, and I was with Marty Bregman at the time. Marty later became his manager, and I said, my God, if ever I directed a film, because I hadn't done any films yet, if ever I directed a film, that's the actor I'd like to work with. We went backstage and met him after, and as I say, Marty eventually started to manage him, but I don't know if it's known or not known, but I've told the story a number of times, because I had first turned down Panic in Needle Park because the lab had scratched the last 6 minutes of my first film, and I was very upset, and I wasn't really thinking too much of my next film. I was just working on this film. Mm-hmm. And I went up to Marty's office, and he said, there's a really good script out there. I said, what was it? He said, well, it's called Panic in Needle Park. I said, I think I just turned that down. He said, but, Al is interested. And that sort of changed the whole thing. I went back, reread it, went back to the producers, told them how foolish I was, and I think they agreed with me. But they were kind enough to give me another shot at it, and that's how it started with Al.
Mm. What did you see in him that you thought that he could bring to this character in Panic?
Well, it was just such power. First of all, when I read it the second time, he was the character. I mean, I didn't think that he had to even act. Of course, that's not true, but I just saw the character. He became the character for me, and not being a student of acting, I depended on things like that at the beginning.
Yeah. Was there a rehearsal process involved in this film?
Yeah. Well, actually, it was more than a rehearsal process because this was Al's first major film. And he, Kitty, and we just hung out for about a month and a half together. We'd go to places where junkies were. We'd go to hospitals. We'd go to seminars. We just really hung out. We got to know each other. We got to know them. We saw awful things that we related to for our characters, but it's sort of something that doesn't really happen in most films because economically it's not feasible for actors to give up a month and a half of their time to just hang out.
Yeah, it's a real luxury, I would think.
Yeah, it is.
And all that experience, it definitely made it onto the screen. All of that rehearsal time and all that experience you had pre-production.
Well, I'm pleased when Al always says he thinks it's his best role, and in some ways I understand what he's talking about because he had the most freedom to express himself.
Yeah. Well, he was actually, he showed 8 minutes of Panic in Needle Park to the studio behind The Godfather. Is this true? And
actually, it was about 20 minutes because he screen tested 4 times for Paramount. Francis Coppola had seen him on the stage the same way I had, and Francis wanted him. There was no question about it. But it's Paramount that didn't want him, and he screen tested 4 times. I had put together a 20-minute version of Panic so that we could take it around to distributors and such, and Al asked if I would send it to Francis, and I did, and obviously he showed it to Paramount, and they changed their mind.
I have to ask you about Scarecrow because this is absolutely one of my favorite movies.
Oh, thank you.
And I know that it's a script that Pacino particularly loved and championed. At least that's what I heard. Is that true?
When we were shooting, or just after we were shooting Panic, he was telling me about Scarecrow. I was not involved in it, and I don't know, something happened. Something must have happened with the director that was involved with it, and both he and Hackman didn't want to do the film with that director, so I guess they had a conversation. My agent, who was also Al's agent, sent it to me, and I didn't quite know what for, and I called him, and he told me, read it and tell me if you like it. I did, and they said, and they told us the situation. After a while, both Al and I, we felt a little bit guilty about the situation, and we told our agent, we don't really like acing somebody out of a script like that. It just doesn't seem right. And he got furious and said to me, anyhow, do you like the script? I said, yes, I do. He says, well, just leave the rest to me. And they made some arrangement in which everything was very amicable.
Well, in the film, Gene Hackman, who incidentally, Gene Hackman has said that this is his personal favorite out of all of his own performances. I've read that many times. But Gene Hackman and Al Pacino, they essentially play 2 hobos that form a bond. Hackman is the kind of the tough and embittered half, and Pacino is the soft-hearted and vulnerable one. Right. Were their working styles very different?
Yes. I always said that, Gene would come in and he'd put on his costume and he became the character. Al sort of carried it with him most of the time. And I think in some ways, although I know Gene respected his acting, he was a little bit, maybe I wouldn't say nervous, but he understood that Al and I had worked together, so he was a little bit cautious about that. But Al always, just took more time, and Gene was always, Gene's the ultimate professional. He's always right there, always on time, and Al isn't. But every actor is different, and every actor needs different care. And
right.
It sort of, I think in some ways, affected their relationship. And I saw that at one point, Gene was trying to intimidate Al. And I thought it over, and I thought, well, that's really what's happening in the film.
Exactly, yeah.
So I'll just leave it happen for a while. But years later, I started to realize that was Gene preparing himself for that character.
Mm.
I don't think it was something personal. I think it was Gene just preparing himself for that character. Al was the other character. Because Al becomes the characters that he takes on.
Yeah.
There's an actress in Scarecrow, Penny Allen.
Yes.
And she plays Al's wife. And from the first time she read for me till the time we performed it on film, she would be just as dynamic in that role. And I said to Al, tell me, what is it that allows her to be so right on every single time? And he said, if you tell her she's a chair, she's a chair. And I realized that's the way Al is. If you tell him he is something or you show him a character, he becomes that character.
Wow. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that scene specifically, because Penny Allen, as you say, that's the only scene she has in the film, correct?
Right.
And it is a high point of the film. It's a phone conversation between Pacino and Penny Allen.
Right.
And phone acting, how does that work? Do each of them have someone to play off of, or?
I believe she was on the other end of that phone.
Yeah.
And he was on the other end of that phone, because I usually try to make it as honest as possible.
Yeah.
And but as I say with her, I've seen her do that maybe 8, 9, 10 times, because every time she would do it, she'd be that powerful. And Al was the same way. And they were just into that scene.
It's very interesting, because these are among two of my favorite moments from Pacino's films. The phone conversation in Scarecrow and the phone conversation in Dog Day Afternoon. He just
right.
excels in both of those moments.
But to be a director with actors like that is something extraordinary. I would stand behind the camera sometime, and I know that we talk a lot about different aspects of the character, about different aspects of the film. But when you stand behind the camera and you see them do things that are just so amazing, you just say to yourself, how did they get to that? Because, we never got near that in our discussions, but that's their craft, that's their talent.
In terms of the rehearsal period for Scarecrow, I understand that they actually, Hackman and Pacino actually went hitching together for a period of time?
Yeah, they went up to San Francisco for a while, and they went around together, but I wasn't involved in that. I sanctioned it, and I just said I thought it was a great idea, and they did that. I think they're a great combination, and the first scene in the diner, which goes on for 8 minutes, I just barely put one cut in there because they were so fantastic going on.
That's right, yeah.
In a scene together, and they're just, I've seen great actors. I've seen Olivier do the telephone book, and he was great. That's the way these actors are.
You shot it in continuity as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
How important was that, given the nature of the relationship that they had to build in the film? What does that do for acting?
Well, I think it's important to the actors. It's important to the director because we can think, linearly. We can think what's happening next. If doing a film is like being in a time capsule, because you go to the end, you stop at the end, you go back to the middle, you come back to the end, you're back to the beginning, and it's very difficult to keep your emotions, your moods, and but for an actor, and I think Gene has mentioned this a number of times, it was just such a pleasure for them. Well, for them, it's like doing a play.
Right.
I've always heard actors say that they get more out of doing theater because film sort of takes things out of you, while theater puts things into you.
Yeah.
And I think it has a lot to do with the continuity of acting.
I couldn't let you go without asking about some of the other outstanding talents that you've worked with, just to get your impressions on them. I know you worked with Meryl Streep.
Yes.
What was your impression of her?
Well, see, I didn't know Meryl before she came in. She actually came in and read for me, which I feel now privileged. But she came in, and I just was astounded by her reading. Same thing happened with Morgan Freeman. He came in and he read for me, and because Morgan had been around for 30 years, but he didn't do any films. Meryl hadn't had any films out. Actually, while we were shooting, the television series came out, and she was an instant star. Before that, we'd go to dinner and everything. Nobody would even take notice, and as soon as the television series came out, that was before Deer Hunter.
Yes. She was in Holocaust.
Holocaust. Yeah. Holocaust came out, and she was immediate success.
Mm.
And she's one of the nicest people in the world.
Yeah. Also Morgan Freeman, who just dynamic and street smart, just incredible performance. What was that experience like? What is Morgan?
Well, he came in. Well, the whole experience was great, but he came in and he was very cool. It was not in my mind to have somebody that old in the part, but he just sat down, talked for a little bit, reached in his bag, took out a banana, started eating it. There was just something, and a lot of my casting has to do with my conversations with them and my impressions. I went home that night and I said to my wife, I read an actor today that was just fantastic. I think I'm going to change the part so they can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I spoke to him about it, I said, if you were CEO of General Motors, that's the way you would handle the street. And he went ahead. He just started building on that.